A billionaire
She
offered $1 million to anyone who could start her dead father's last Ferrari. Engineers came. Master technicians from 3 different countries came. A man who had genuinely worked on Formula One cars came. Every single one of them failed. And every single one of them packed up their expensive equipment and left. And the car just sat there, silent, in the middle of that glass garage, like a held breath that wouldn't let go. And then, a worn-out old mechanic in a clean but faded work shirt, that would be me, walked into that cathedral of glass and chrome and looked at her and told her I didn't want the $1 million. I wanted a $7 keychain. The whole room laughed at me. The daughter didn't. Because something in my face must have told her I wasn't joking, and something in my face must have told her that I had known her father, and within about 10 minutes of that moment, that silent Ferrari was going to roar back to life in a way that put every credentialed engineer in that room to shame, and not because I am smarter than they are. I want to be clear about that from the start. I am not smarter than those men, but every last one of them had walked in and seen a machine, and I walked in and remembered a man. But before I tell you about the keychain and about what it was that made a grown woman who could buy literally anything in the world sink down and weep on a bare concrete floor, do me one quick favor. If you have ever lost somebody and would give anything you own just to hear one small, ordinary, everyday sound of them again, hit that subscribe button right now. This whole channel is built for the people who understand that it's the smallest things that end up holding all the love. Go on, I'll wait. Then, let me tell you about a man named Arturo and about the 25 years I spent with my hands inside his cars. My name is Ray Buckley. I'm 45 years old, and I am a mechanic, like my father before me, and his father before him. 3 generations of the same grease worked down into the same family fingernails. I learned the trade standing at my dad's elbow in a shop that smelled like motor oil and percolator coffee, and he had learned it standing at his own dad's elbow, and somewhere across all those years, it stopped being merely a job that we did and quietly became the thing that we were. And I need to tell you something right here at the start, because without it, none of the rest of this lands the way it truly happened. I buried my own father just months ago. I'll come back around to that because it ended up mattering far more than I ever could have guessed. But I need you to hold it in the back of your mind, because every single thing I'm about to tell you, I understood the way that I did precisely because there was a fresh grave somewhere with my own father's name cut into the stone. For 25 years, I was Arturo Moretti's mechanic. Now, Arturo was a self-made man. He had built an entire empire up out of absolutely nothing. The kind of long odds, rags to riches story they write the thick books about and name the business school case studies after. But I want to be honest with you, that is not how I knew him. Not at all. I knew him as a man who loved cars the exact way that certain men love music, not as a hobby or a collection, but helplessly, in his whole body, like it was wired into him at the factory. He had more than enough money to buy any automobile on the face of the earth, and a whole fleet of white-gloved, factory-certified dealership technicians standing by to tend to every one of them. And instead, for 25 straight years, that man drove himself clear across town to a little independent shop with a cracked parking lot to have a fellow in a faded shirt named Ray work on his cars. People asked him why he did that. Reporters asked him even once or twice, and I happened to overhear him answer it one time, and I have never forgotten what he said. He said, "Because Ray doesn't fix my cars. Ray listens to them. There's a difference between those 2 things, and at my age it has become the only difference that matters to me at all." And we became friends. The slow way, the only real way. Over the better part of a quarter of a century, one engine at a time. He'd swing by the shop on Saturday mornings sometimes when there wasn't a single thing wrong with any car he owned, just to push a paper cup of coffee into my hand and lean his weight against a fender and talk to me about nothing and everything. I came to know his hands, the big, square, capable hands of a man who'd done real labor before he ever wore a suit. I knew the way he favored his right knee when the weather turned. I knew that he hummed old songs from when he was young and poor, under his breath whenever he was truly happy and didn't realize he was doing it. And I knew his cars. Every single one of them. I knew them better than I have ever known almost anything in this life. And most of all, I knew the Ferrari. The Ferrari was his favorite thing in the world, an older one, a model he had wanted desperately since he was a barefoot boy with holes in his pockets, and he had finally gone and bought it on the exact day he first felt rich enough to believe he deserved it. And from that day forward, he loved that machine far past the bounds of all reason. I'll tell you one small thing about him because it says it all. The first year I worked on that Ferrari, I stayed 3 hours past close on a Friday to chase down a rattle that nobody else could hear. A tiny thing. A heat shield that had loosened a hair. Most owners would never have noticed it. He'd noticed, and when I finally found it and fixed it, I didn't charge him for the 3 hours, because I'd enjoyed the hunt. He found out somehow, and the next Saturday he showed up with 2 coffees and sat on my workbench and told me, dead serious, that a man who'd undercharge him for work he loved was a man he could trust with anything for the rest of his life. He was right. For 25 years he never once asked me what a job would cost before I did it. Not once. He just trusted that I'd be fair, and I trusted that he'd never make me prove I was, and somewhere in that little arrangement, we quietly became the kind of friends that don't need to say so. Arturo died 8 months ago. His heart in his sleep, the way only the genuinely lucky ones get to go. And I put on my one good suit and I went to the funeral, and I stood at the very back of an enormous room, the mechanics standing quiet among the titans and the senators and the men with their names on buildings. And I grieved the loss of my friend in private. And then, just 4 months after that, I buried my own father. And those 2 separate griefs braided themselves together inside my chest into a single heavy rope. And in the pulling of that rope I came to learn a thing about loss that I am going to share with you now, because it is the actual key to this entire story. Pun fully intended, as you are about to see. Here's the thing that not one single person ever warns you about when it comes to losing somebody you love. It is not the great big obvious absences that finally take you down to your knees. It isn't the empty chair at the holiday table, the one everybody's braced for. No, it's the small sounds. It is the sudden ambushing realization that you are never again, as long as you live, going to hear that person clear their throat in the next room over. Never hear them hum that one particular song while they do the dishes. Never hear them set their coffee cup down on the kitchen counter in that one specific way that was theirs and nobody else's. After my own dad passed, I swear to you, I would have given anything I owned, anything at all, just to hear the worn third stair in his house squeak one more time underneath his foot. Just that. Just one small, stupid, ordinary, holy sound that would have meant for 1/2 of a second that he was still here in the world with me. That, right there, is what grief actually is, once the funeral casseroles are gone and the cards stop coming. Grief lives down in the small sounds. I learned that the hard way in my own dad's empty house the week after we buried him. I'd gone over to start sorting his things. You have to eventually. And I stood in his kitchen and caught myself listening. Just listening, for nothing, for him, for the scrape of his chair, for him calling my name from the other room the way he did, 2 syllables, the second one higher. And the house just sat there, quiet, the way that glass garage would sit quiet a few months later. And I understood, standing in that kitchen, that I would have traded the whole shop, the truck, everything I owned, for 30 more seconds of ordinary noise from a man who'd never make any again. I didn't know it yet, but that kitchen was teaching me exactly what I'd need to know to walk into Sophia's cathedral and see what all those experts couldn't. Grief was getting me ready. That's the cruel mercy of it. It ruins you, and then it makes you useful to the next person it ruins. And that, as it turns out, is exactly what brings us to Arturo's daughter, and to the silent Ferrari. Her name is Sophia. She was Arturo's only child, and the sole heir to all of it, a billionaire in her own right now, on paper, though I would come to understand very quickly that she would have signed every dollar of it away in a single heartbeat to get even 5 more minutes with her father. After he died, the estate got itself sorted out, the lawyers did their long, slow, expensive work, and when the dust of all of it finally settled, Sophia kept the Ferrari. Of course she did. It was the most him of anything he had ever owned. More him than the houses, more him than the company, more him than any of it. But then here is the thing that happened, the small, strange thing that set this whole improbable day into motion. The car would not start. It had sat untouched for a few months while the estate was being settled, and when Sophia finally went out to start it up, to hear it, I am certain, far more than to actually drive it anywhere, the thing was dead. And not the battery. That was the first thing anyone checked, and the battery was fine, fully charged. The engine itself was sound. The fuel was clean and fresh. Every last mechanical system in that car was, by every measure, in perfect working order. And yet the Ferrari simply, flatly, absolutely would not turn over. It would crank and crank and crank, and refuse to catch. As though the car itself had made some private decision, on the very day that its owner's heart stopped, to fall silent right along with him. And Sophia, drowning in grief, wealthy past the point of reason, and utterly unable to bear the idea that her father's single, most beloved possession on this earth had gone mute and dead, did the thing that people with limitless money do when they find themselves truly desperate and powerless. She threw money at it, a great towering mountain of money. She offered, and she did it publicly, $1 million cash to anyone alive who could start her late father's Ferrari. And I think, if I'm being as honest as I know how to be, that she didn't even really care about getting the car running so that she could drive it anywhere. I don't think that was it at all. I think she just needed, with a need that had clawed its way down to the bone, to hear it run one more time. The exact same way I needed to hear that third stare. And oh, they came. My lord, did they come running. Master Ferrari technicians flew in from overseas on the strength of that number. Engineers arrived hauling diagnostic equipment that cost more than my entire house and the lot it sits on. A man came who, I was reliably told, had spent years working on actual Formula One race engines at the very pinnacle of the sport. For $1 million, the very finest automotive minds that money could summon out of the woodwork descended in a flock upon that glass garage, and they plugged in their gleaming laptops, and they ran their sophisticated diagnostics, and one by one, every single one of them slowly tore his own hair out. Because every diagnostic test that any of them ran kept telling them the very same impossible, maddening thing, over and over. There is nothing wrong with this car, nothing, and yet it would not start. I only heard about any of it at all because the estate's lawyer happened to remember my name. Remembered, somewhere in a file, that old Arturo Moretti had kept a particular mechanic he trusted above all others for decades, and he called me, almost as an afterthought, and I could hear the faint embarrassment in his voice, calling a small shop grease monkey after 3 solid weeks of the world's foremost experts had already thrown up their hands. "Mr. Buckley," he said, "this is admittedly a very long shot, and you would of course be just as eligible for the reward as anyone else, but Miss Moretti is genuinely at her wit's end, and you did know the car, and I very nearly said no. I want you to know that. I was still down deep in the well of my own grief, my father only months in the ground, and I had no appetite at all for a circus. But I had loved Arturo Moretti for 25 years, so in the end I drove across town one last time, the same drive I'd made 1,000 times before, to put my hands on his car one final time. The glass garage was a genuine cathedral, soaring panes of glass and polished concrete and track lighting like a museum. And there, in the very center of all of it, sat the Ferrari, gleaming and silent and beautiful, surrounded on every side by the scattered wreckage of expert failure. Abandoned diagnostic machines, open laptops gone to screensaver, a couple of frowning technicians still hunched and muttering over readouts that refused to make sense. And off to one side stood Sophia herself, immaculately dressed, perfectly composed on the surface, and absolutely hollow-eyed underneath it, wearing that particular bone-deep exhaustion that belongs only to a person who has been made to grieve for weeks with a paying audience watching. The experts all turned and looked at me when I came in. The old guy, the faded shirt, the scuffed boots, with that polite, knowing contempt that highly credentialed men reserve for a man who works with his hands and hasn't got a single letter after his name. One of them, I saw it plainly, actually smirked. And I did not look at the car. I need you to really notice that, because it turns out to be the whole entire thing. Every single one of those brilliant, gifted, expensive men had walked into that room and looked first, and only, at the car. I didn't. I walked in and I looked at Sophia and I said, "I am so very sorry about your father. He was my friend for 25 years, and he talked about you all the time, all the time. You should know that." And that hollow-eyed woman's careful composure cracked straight down the middle, just for an instant, because I do not think that in 3 solid weeks of million-dollar problem-solving, one single one of those experts had said so much as one word to her about her dad as an actual human being, a person, a father. They'd all come for the puzzle. Not one had come for her. And then I asked her the question that started everything. I said, "Sophia, when they gave you your father's personal effects, the things that were in his pockets the day he passed, was there a keychain, an old one, beat-up brown leather worn soft as butter, with a little brass Ferrari shield on it that had mostly rubbed away to nothing? He'd carried it 30 years. It would have looked like absolute worthless junk sitting next to everything else he owned." She stared at me for a long moment, and then, slowly, she nodded. She told me that, yes, the estate had catalogued it, that it was sitting in a box somewhere with his wallet and his wristwatch, and that not one single person had thought a thing of it. Just an old, worn-out keychain with a couple of keys on it, the kind of thing that looks like nothing, worth maybe $7 at a truck stop. "That," I said, "is what I want. Not the $1 million. I don't want your money. I want that keychain. Please, go and get it." And the experts laughed. They genuinely, openly laughed out loud. "The old fool wants a battered keychain instead of $1 million in cash. Can you believe this, Rube? Can you believe what walks in off the street?" But Sophia was not laughing. Sophia was looking very hard at my face, and she turned and sent someone running for the box of her father's things. Now, let me tell you exactly what it was that I knew, standing in that room, that not one of those brilliant men did, because it had absolutely nothing to do with engineering, and everything in the world to do with having known a man. That Ferrari, like an awful lot of cars built in its particular era, was fitted with an immobilizer, an electronic anti-theft system. And the way that system works is brutally simple and completely unforgiving. The engine will not start, no matter what on God's green earth you do to it, unless the car detects one specific electronic chip, a transponder, embedded down inside the head of the one correct master key. Not a copy of the key, not a valet key, not the spare from the dealership. The one original chipped master key with the one correct living transponder inside it, silently talking to the car's computer brain at the turn of the ignition. And without that exact key present, the car will crank and crank and crank until the battery dies, and it will never, ever catch. Which is, of course, precisely and exactly what it had been doing for 3 solid weeks, while $1 million worth of the world's finest experts chased imaginary phantom faults around and around through its perfectly healthy electronics. There was never one single thing wrong with that car. There was everything wrong with the key they kept trying to use, because here is what every one of those experts did, the same reasonable, sensible, logical thing. When they needed a key to attempt to start the car, they reached for the keys from the estate's official, documented set, the pristine spare, the one that had been kept all along in the velvet-lined presentation key box with all the certificates and the paperwork, the obvious correct key that any sensible, organized, professional person on Earth would naturally reach for first. But that key's transponder was dead, or it was only ever a valet key to begin with, or it had simply never been properly programmed to the car. I had my private guesses as to which, but the true working master key, the one carrying the one living transponder that the car was sitting there cranking and crying out and desperate to find, that key had never once in 30 years been inside any velvet presentation box. Not ever, because I knew Arturo Moretti, and Arturo Moretti, for 30 solid years, did not trust fancy velvet key boxes, and he did not trust valet keys, and he did not trust backup systems and documentation and the neat organized way that other people did things. He kept the one real key, the single key that actually woke his beloved Ferrari up and made it sing, on a battered, worn-out, $7 brown leather keychain that rode in his right front trouser pocket, every single day for 3 decades straight. The experts had taken one look at that keychain in the box of effects and dismissed it instantly as junk, because it looked exactly like junk. And I knew the moment I walked in that it was the only object in that entire glass cathedral that meant a single thing. They brought me the box, and I opened it up, and there it was, his keychain. The leather worn dark and soft and molded permanently to the curve of his own pocket, the little brass shield rubbed nearly smooth and featureless by 30 years of his thumb running across it, an idle habit I had watched him do 1,000 times while he leaned on my fenders and talked. I held it in my hand for a second or two longer than I strictly needed to, because I had seen that exact object in that man's living hand 1,000 times, and holding it now was its own kind of grief and its own kind of grace, all braided together. It was, for me, like hearing the third stare. Then I slid the one real master key off of the ring, and I walked over to the Ferrari, and I lowered myself down into Arturo's own driver's seat, and I put the key in, and I turned it. The car caught on the very first try. That glorious, deep, throaty, impossible V8 came roaring up out of 3 weeks of dead silence and absolutely filled that glass cathedral, wall to wall and floor to ceiling, with the living sound of a man who, it turned out, was not all the way gone after all, not entirely, not while his car could still be made to sing his song. 3 full weeks of the finest, most decorated automotive engineers that $1 million could summon out of the entire world, defeated, completely and utterly, by a $7 leather keychain that any single one of them would have tossed straight into the trash without a second glance. And Sophia made a sound that I am quite certain I will never forget for as long as I live. She clapped both of her hands up over her mouth, and her knees simply went out from under her, and she sank straight down onto that cold, bare concrete floor in her perfect, immaculate clothes. And she wept. And it was not the careful, contained public grieving she had been performing for an audience for weeks on end. It was the real thing, the deep thing, the thing from the very bottom. Because she was hearing her father again, the engine that he had loved with his whole heart, running exactly the way it had run when he was still alive and well and humming under his breath. I had given her back the third stare. I had handed a grieving daughter one more ordinary, holy sound of the man that she had lost. I shut it off again after a minute or so, gently, because you do not run a cold engine like that hard for long, and any mechanic worth his salt knows it, and Arturo would have clipped me round the ear for it. And the silence that came down after the engine stopped was a completely different silence than the dead one that had been in that room before. It was a silence with the sound still living inside of it. I have heard a lot of engines go quiet in my life. That's most of the job, really, the turning off as much as the turning on. But I had never once heard a silence like that one. It wasn't empty. It was full. It was the silence of a room that had just been reminded the man wasn't all the way gone and was holding on to the proof of it as long as it could before it faded. Every person in that glass cathedral felt it. Even the experts. One of them, the F1 man, took his cap off without seeming to know he'd done it. Nobody spoke for a long while. You don't, in a silence like that. You just let it be what it is. And Sophia, still down there on the floor, looked up at me through everything, and she asked me why. Why on earth I hadn't wanted the $1 million. Anyone else alive would have taken it, she said. The experts most certainly would have taken it, and argued for more. Why in God's name a $7 keychain instead? And so I lowered myself down and sat on that cold, concrete floor right next to a weeping billionaire, just 2 grieving people sitting together on a garage floor, which underneath everything is all either one of us actually was. And I told her the truth. I told her about my own father, 4 months in the ground. I told her about the worn third stair in his house, and how I would give every single thing I owned just to hear it creak one more time. And I told her that taking $1 million to start her father's car would have felt, to me, down in my gut, exactly like charging a grieving daughter money to hear her own dad's voice one last time. Like standing at a graveside with my hand out. Like robbing a grave. I did not do it for money, I told her. I did it because somebody that I had loved for 25 years was living in the sound of that engine, the very same way somebody she had loved her whole life was living in it. And you do not, you simply do not put a price tag on the act of handing a person their father back for 30 seconds. I just wanted the keychain, I told her, because I had loved the old man too in my own way, and I wanted one worn, ordinary, overlooked $7 thing that his hands had closed around every single day for 30 years. That was payment enough for me. That was more than enough. That was a fortune. Now, I told you at the very start that this is not a fairy tale, and I meant it, but the honest truth of how it ended is somehow gentler and better than any fairy tale would have been. Sophia would not, in the end, let me walk out of that place with only a keychain. But, and this is the important part, she also did not insult me or the whole moment by trying to force that $1 million into my hands, because by then she had come to understand me well enough, in one single hour on a concrete floor, to know that the money would have cheapened and ruined the only real thing that had passed between us. So instead she did something that, I will tell you honestly, I am still not entirely over to this day. She asked me about my shop, about my father's shop, 3 generations of Buckleys, my grandfather's hands and my father's hands and now mine. And then she asked me about my daughter. My daughter. I haven't yet told you about Cora. Cora is 7 years old, and she came into my life late and entirely unexpected, and she is, without any competition whatsoever, the brightest light in the whole of it. She had actually been out in the truck that very day, working quietly through a puzzle book in the back seat, because it was a weekend, and a weekend is my time with her. And when Sophia learned that I had a little girl, and that the 3-generation Buckley family shop that my grandfather had started with his own 2 hands was struggling along the slow, hard way that every small, honest shop in this country struggles to survive now, she did the quiet, dignified, exactly right thing that I have come to believe only the genuinely transformed are even capable of doing. She did not write me a check. She knew better than that by then. Instead, she became the shop's patron, in the old true sense of the word. She sends her own entire collection of cars to us now for their care and keeping. And she told every single wealthy, car-loving friend and acquaintance she has in this world about the only man my father ever trusted with the things he loved. And inside of a single year, that struggling little shop with the cracked parking lot had a 2-month waiting list out the door, and my Cora, my girl, has a college fund with her name on it. Sophia handed my whole family a future, and, crucially, she did it in a way that I was actually able to accept and keep my spine, as one grieving person to another, with our dignity left fully intact on both sides of it. And here is the part of all of it that matters to me the very most, when I lie awake and turn the whole strange day over. My Cora gets to keep her father's family shop, the one her great-grandfather started, the one I will hand down to her someday if she ever wants it, and I think she might. The legacy did not die. The chain did not break. Exactly the same way that Arturo's legacy doesn't die. Every single time Sophia goes out and starts that Ferrari now, which she does, she told me, once every week just to hear it run. Just to hear him, she hardly ever actually drives it anywhere at all, she said. She just starts it up and she closes her eyes and she sits there and she listens. I make a decent living. I'll never be a rich man. And I once held a worn $7 keychain in the palm of my hand instead of $1 million in cash, and I have not regretted it for one single second of one single day since. There is a version of that afternoon where I take the money, where I am simply a clever man who solved a hard problem and collected a fair and enormous reward and drove home that evening a brand new millionaire. And there is no version of that afternoon where I do that, and also still get to be the man who sat down on a cold concrete floor and handed a grieving daughter her own father's voice back as a free gift, the way that grief is supposed to be honored, with reverence, and never, ever invoiced. The money would have bought a very great many things. It could not, have bought the look that came over Sophia's face when that great engine finally caught. Some things on this earth simply cannot be paid for, because the very act of being paid for them empties them out and leaves nothing behind but a receipt. I keep Arturo's keychain on my own keys now, right there next to my truck key, worn brown leather, a little brass shield rubbed smooth and faceless. And every single time my thumb finds it without my meaning it to, I think of a man who drove all the way across town for 25 years because I listened to his cars instead of merely fixing them, and I think of my own dad, gone now, and the worn third stair I'll never hear again. And I think that maybe, just maybe, the entire point of a whole life spent with your two hands on things is finally learning that the cheapest, most worn out, most completely overlooked object in the whole room is, very often, the only single one in it that was ever holding any love at all. That night, I tucked my Cora into her bed, and she asked me sleepily if I had fixed the fancy car, because she'd seen that big glass building through the truck window and been impressed by it. And I told her that I had, yes. And she asked me if it had been hard to fix, and I said, "No, baby, it was just about the easiest thing in the whole world. I just remembered somebody." She didn't understand what I meant by that, and that is perfectly all right. She will understand it someday. Someday, a long, long time from now, if there is any mercy in this world, my girl is going to lose somebody that she loves too, and she is going to find herself standing somewhere quiet and desperate, aching with her whole body just to hear one small, ordinary, vanished sound one more time. And on that day, she is going to understand every single thing her old man ever meant by it. I pray it is a long, long time from now. But she'll have the shop, and she'll have the keychain someday, and she'll understand. So let me ask you just one thing before you go. A whole room full of certified geniuses walked in and saw a machine, and one worn-out old mechanic walked in and saw a man, and that right there was the entire difference in the world between $1 million failure and a $7 miracle. So here is what I honestly want to know from you tonight. What is the small, ordinary sound, the creak of a stair, a hummed song, a coffee cup set down on a counter, that you would give just about anything to hear one more time from someone that you have lost? Tell me about it down in the comments. Say their name out loud if you want to. I read every single one of them, and I would be truly, deeply honored to know. And if this story got to you tonight, if you believe, the way that I have come to believe it right down to the very ground, that love hides itself away inside the smallest and most overlooked things, and that the truest gifts in this whole life can never once be bought or sold for any price, then do me that one small favor. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. Drop a like so that the next person can find their way here too. Leave your own story down in the comments, and I will see you in the very next one. Trust me, it's a good one.